This is Tabletop Babble, and I'm Amber. Hello! Today on the show, I chatted with GMs, game designers, writers, and advicemongers Jim and Pruitt of WebDM. We sat down on June the 8th, and they shared how WebDM got started, what kinds of advice they give in the gaming sphere. They also were kind enough to give me some advice. And of course, we chatted about Worlds of WebDM Weird Wastelands, a toolkit for 5e that can also be used for other systems, with a focus on exploration in a weird post-apocalyptic fantasy setting. As of this episode airing, there are 12 days left on their Kickstarter, so you should go and check it out. Hello, Jim and Pruitt. Welcome to Tabletop Babble. For my listeners, please, would you mind introducing yourself, your pronouns, and what you do in the space? I'll do this. Let's go with Jim first, since I have not played a game with you.
Right. So my name is Jim Davis, otherwise possibly known as WebDM Jim. I am he, him, and I am the creative director, co-host, and co-founder of WebDM.
Cool. And then Pruitt, I've mentioned we've played one game together before on WebDM Plays. So yeah, hi.
No, I'm Pruitt, Jonathan Pruitt, but everybody just call me Pruitt. I am the other half of WebDM, co-creator, co-host, and yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Like, I know you guys from the internet sphere.
Sure, yeah.
And I've seen WebDM come up, and I've played on WebDM's Torg Eternity, but I want to know, like, what is WebDM exactly?
Well, WebDM, I think, is a place for people who love tabletop role-playing games that want to learn how to be better players, better DMs. We've been doing this for over 6 years, so we have quite a bevy of videos, as we've been doing one video a week. Every Wednesday, we have another video come out. We've done videos on monsters, on DM tips, player classes, subclasses, spells, feats. We've been around since 5th edition started, right after it started, about 5 months after it came out, 5 or 6 months. So we've kind of been here. I started playing role-playing games when I was 19, so, you know, and I know Jim was sooner, but he can speak for himself on that.
Sure, yeah. WebDM is, like Pruitt was saying, we've been going at it for a while. We happened to start this YouTube channel in, like, right at the beginning of the 5th edition sort of boom, and rode this early wave. And, like, all of our friendship, Pruitt and I have been friends since we were 20-something, 19, 20-something, you know. And our friendship's been characterized by talking about Dungeons & Dragons, and talking about when we're going to play Dungeons & Dragons, what we did the last time we played Dungeons & Dragons. Like, doesn't matter where we're at, what's going on, party for somebody else. No, at some point, Pruitt and I, and then a growing number of people, will just sort of gather around and talk about D&D. And so one day, our other co-founder, Travis Bowles, came to us and said, like, hey, let's do a channel where we put you guys down and you just talk about D&D. And here we are 6 years later. We cover everything from, you know, like Pruitt was saying, monsters to GM advice to, I like to think we're mostly inspirational, but we also try to delve into some of the more technical topics. But yeah, I've been playing role-playing games for quite a long time, and it's thoroughly infected my brain.
I played D&D 3.5 for about 7 years, and I stopped playing when 4E came out I don't know, just because my friend group changed.
Sure, yeah.
And I kind of, like, missed the entire online stuff. Like, I just missed it personally. And so I'm interested in, did you guys start out first just chatting as friends, like the shows, WebDM shows, is just us chatting about D&D and things we found, and then it kind of migrated into advice? Or did it start out as just tips?
What that came out of, I was living with Travis at the time, and he had a bunch of equipment and wanted to do a YouTube show. That's all he wanted to do. He played a smattering of role-playing games through his life or whatever. Meanwhile, me and Jim, we've had a home group for, at this point, 12 years strong, I think, which is, you know, some people don't have that, and I feel blessed that we had such a long table group that you know, about 4 people that were kind of core, but a couple here and there coming in and out throughout the years. But when Travis was like, hey, we should do something, think of an idea. And then one day I was coming home from work and I was thinking about, I need to call Jim and ask him about that thing. Because that's the thing, is it was always like, I have a question, I need to ask Jim about it. And so it was just kind of like, yeah, I need to ask Jim. He's kind of like my own little WebMD. Or he's my WebDM. Oh my God. And like, I almost had a wreck, like driving home. And I might have broken a few laws to get home faster just to come in and go, hey, Travis, WebDM. And he's like, wait, what? He's like, no, you mean WebM? And I was like, WebDM. And he's like, and it was just kind of like, the light came on. And so then it took Jim, I'm gonna throw you under the bus a little bit here. It took a little convincing. Jim was very reticent to do this, but I remember we were at our white elephant, we call it Mulligan Christmas, something me and my friends would do after you're done with all the family Christmas crap and you've gotten all the arguments out of the way over the turkey and politics and all that BS. You go to Mulligan Christmas with your friends. And that's all it was. It was just meant to get together, pass around stupid gifts, have a little drink, have some fun. And so we cornered Jim at Mulligan Christmas and just gave him the hard sell. And it took a while. He's like, I don't know why people want to listen to me talk about D&D. And I was like, Jim, I've listened to you talk about D&D for like 12 years. So I think that somebody else might want to. You know, like, and so that was where it started, and it was meant to be like, that's why if you watch the show, Jim is behind the screen and I'm off to the side with the players' books. It was meant to be a player coming to his DM asking for advice was the original, like, dynamic. And because I hadn't DM'd a lot at this point. I had only tried a few campaigns and they crashed horribly in a ball of fire. And so that was the original kind of setup.
So I sometimes wish that I was recording video and putting it out as video, because my facial reaction sometimes when you said WebMD and I literally just now got I'm a slow to pick up on stuff, but that is so genius. So I would have had the same reaction in the car and I drove it. Oh my God. Gosh. So it's so funny because like I said, I missed all the advice stuff. Like a lot of my GMing advice from a player I did the same thing, talk to my own GMs. Mm-hmm. So how did you convince, like, was there like, so were you getting your own advice online from other places? What was your, like, how did you find out that there is a market for this?
Short answer, not really at all. I always came to Jim. And that is where Jim comes into play here.
Yeah. So for me, like, I was always the person in the group who was like, I just want there to be a game. I will run it. Like, I don't care if it's terrible. I don't care if I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I just want a game to happen. And too many times we have a bunch of players sitting around sort of we're twiddling our thumbs, and nobody wanted to give up their character to run the game. And I was like, you know what? I'll just do this. And so that just ended up being sort of like every time there was enough people around and we had availability, we would be, start playing Dungeons and Dragons or some other game, like whether it was a World of Darkness or, GURPS or whatever was, people were into at the time. And as the group kind of like solidified around a core of 4 to 5 people, and we started like 3rd edition was our game. We were going to play it. That was the one we played over and over and over. We remember what it was like, right? Like trying to build a character and make sure your feats don't screw you over and that you don't build a dud, and like, is this a good option or not? Is this a trap? Like, I felt an obligation as a dungeon master to help my players like through that process as much as they wanted. I had some players who didn't ever want my advice at all, and they were happy to make whatever character they came up with, no matter the mechanical effectiveness. And then I'd have a player like Pruitt who'd show up with reams of paper in which he's scribbled all this math all over it and worked out how much is, when I can get this feed and that feed, and he's plotted it all out. And I didn't want to just like give a BS advice or like force my player to do something that I wanted them to do. So I would go online for years and years and years and look at like various forums and Q&A places and FAQs, all kinds of stuff, and just learned as much as I could so that whenever Pruitt would come and talk to me, I'd be like, well, you could do this or that, or this is probably how this is going to work out. And like that dynamic of for all of my players, the game started with us just talking about the game. Whether it was Pruitt and the sort of the spreadsheets and the chicken scratch of building a character, or another player and just sort of like what was inspiring them about an idea or what they wanted to run. Like, my formative years of DMing were spent just learning as much as I could about how to run the game, and then spending what felt like as much time talking about the game as actually running it. And I felt like that talking about it with my players was what made for such great games, because we were all on the same wavelength. It was great.
The online stuff, when you're like getting that information online and seeing that other people are putting stuff out or asking questions, what are your thoughts about the approachability of D? Like, why do people have, that you get the one GM and it's always the GM?
Yeah.
And everybody else just doesn't want to pick it up. Like, what are your thoughts around that as far as D&D in that system?
Ooh, well, it's intimidating as all get out, right? Like, you're everything else. This one person has responsibility for one character, right? Like, and they don't even need to know everything about that one character. And then you, as a single-brained individual with a schedule and obligations and things outside of the game, have everything else. And so I think it seems intimidating from the outside, and there's certainly been advice and sort of procedures of play and game structures throughout the hobby that have not exactly been effective. Sort of like, read this entire 100-page-long book and absorb it so that you can run it perfectly at the table, or something like that. So I think it seems really intimidating, and until you get comfortable with the BS, with the deception, with the fact that you are just making it up constantly, and that it feels internally like a disaster all the time, once you get comfortable with that, you realize, like, oh, this is, I prefer it. I love it. It's so great. I love it.
Yeah, so like going back to Pruitt, it's like you were saying you weren't really running anything, and the few campaigns that you had were a disaster. Was that the word you used?
Yeah, a glorious disaster. I mean, I'd never really had anything go past like, 5-6 sessions before, like, I was like, this is terrible. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't feel it, whatever. But I will say this, being at the feet of the master here that I have been for 6 years.
Oh, come now.
Quickly, I learned enough. And the things that I started to learn about GMing in general is, well, first off, I think you have to have a certain level of maturity and empathy in order to be a good DM, because you have to start to realize that it isn't about your campaign and your story. It should be about the players. And that was my problem, first off, because I had such a focused mindset of I want everything right. Like Jim said, I would Goldblum all the time for every single character, even if, like, it's just like, hey, I'm thinking about doing a campaign in this. Oh, cool, I'll make a character. Like, I would literally do this. And so I had a whole mental structure of how I would prepare my characters, and I would bring that over to GMing and DMing, and, like, you can't do that. You can't have a rigid structure. That's railroading. That's literally what that is. It's like, oh, I could do this, and then they go here, whatever. And so, yeah, learning the right techniques for good GMing is the point. Like, you don't need to learn all of them. You just need to learn the 5 or 6 that work for you. And so that is what I have learned just being part of WebDM. And so that's what, I hope that we can impart some of that confidence and knowledge to other people, prospective GMs out there.
Yeah.
And have you run a not disaster campaign, Pruitt?
Oh, we ran, a 1.5-year Spelljammer game. I ran, a year-long Spelljammer game on our Twitch channel, and then I've run 2 more full, 12 to 14-week games after that. So, yeah, I've run, 5 campaigns now that were, start, middle, and end, and it felt good. And it was but it was, I will say that first Spelljammer game, sorry, a little tangent to this that also helped it. Find the genre that you are meant to GM. Is I would say one of the biggest things, because what it will do is let you be comfortable enough to actually GM, and then you can spread out and try other genres. But for me, it was the reintroduction of Spelljammer. Like Jim one day being like, "What about Spelljammer? You remember that?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, they have that '90s sci-fi thing, where it's like sci fantasy." And I went and found the books at a Austin place called Half Price Books, which anybody out there who knows how much that box set is, if you want to try to find it used, it's insanely expensive. You can get it off, I think, DriveThruRPG now, # not sponsored. But at Half Price Books, I found both of the main books from the first box set, and I paid $10. $10 for the 2 main books. And it was just like, all right, here it is. It's meant to be. And like from there on, like it wasn't even like I have a. Actually, here they are right here.
Oh.
Here's my 2 campaign Bibles for my Spelljammer campaigns.
Nice.
Right? And it's just 2 big, thick 1-inch folders because, like, I found my genre. I found my people. And it was easier to have those adventures and to express what I wanted to share with my friends and then move on to other things. More fantasy, you know.
I think that's why I haven't run a D&D campaign myself, even though I feel now after being GMing for 3 years, it really isn't, even though I like fantasy, I don't think it fit me because like I have my own like campaign Bible next to me and it's in the genre of stuff I really love. Yeah. And I haven't forced myself to run D&D because I've just not been interested in it, but I'm also interested in though, as you guys have, you know, you said you started out in 3rd edition. Was that right? Or you guys
technically we started playing in 2nd edition.
Oh, okay.
But our core group that Jim was the DM of was around when 3rd edition came out, and that's where like our group finally kind of solidified that lasted for so long.
Yep.
Got it. So have you seen, I mean, I probably already know the answer, but I don't know the detailed answer to this, but have you seen a change of accessibility, easier to approach as a GM through the different editions of D&D?
Yeah, I have. Because there's only one edition of D&D I haven't played. First edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons is the only version I haven't played. And I really like the pre-first edition styles of D&D, the ones from the 70s, because they're like super rules light, fast. I like a really deadly game. I think like the thrill of like, oh my god, this could be my character's last moments, you know, kind of play. Especially as a player, I like it. But yeah, I find that as the scope of the game moved away from like pure dungeon crawling and exploring, you know, ancient catacombs and dungeons and things like that, to like anything's on the table, that there is a kind of, it always felt like to me that there was a missing piece in the gameplay of Dungeons and Dragons. Like if you think of the rule books as sort of like a cookbook, which is an analogy I've heard used before of like, ooh, look at this wonderful thing you're going to prepare for your friends, and they're going to come over and they're just going to absolutely adore it. Doesn't this look amazing and wonderful? And like, there's some of the ingredients there, and you know what the end product is supposed to look like. But it always felt like to me that there was a step missing of like, okay, but as a dungeon master, what do I do? What do I need to prepare to give this experience? And so for me, it was just a trial and error. And like, I've had way more crash and burn terrible campaigns than I ever have successful ones. But for me, it's like after a 5-session disaster, like the next week, I'm like, all right, well, roll up characters for this other thing. And we're just going to keep doing this because I have to play. Like, I just have to. So as I've been in the GM seat for various games, whether it's D&D or others, I just always sort of felt like there was something missing. And I found it personally in older versions of Dungeons & Dragons, where it would say things like, okay, for every 10 minutes of time in this place, do these things so that you can simulate a living environment. And like, this is how long things take and how far people can move in a turn. And it like made the game very real to me. And like when I played in that style, my emotional connection to the gameplay was like intense. Like I was like, oh my God, I love this. And so I just started bringing that style of advice and how to run the game into modern games that I play now. And so I sort of fill that gap myself with my own experience. But yeah, I would say that modern D&D is like, it's accessible. And I think that like the popularity of it speaks for its accessibility. I love the just embracing of all concepts, nothing off the table, like whatever kind of character you want to make. We're not going to worry about level limits and whether elves can be paladins or whatever, you know, like,
We're recording.
like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to play a living spell or a unique being or something like that, like the rules can accommodate you. Like the underlying skeleton of 5e is like really robust and you can do a lot of things with it. But I think like the fact that WebDM and so many other advice outlets exist speaks to there being something missing for like how to play and specifically how to run D&D, and that like that might, I don't know, I don't want people to look at the game and go like, well, I can't do that. Like, yeah, you can. Yes, you can. It might not be your thing, but you can, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I love this topic because my partner right now is reading this history game book, and he's reading about like how D&D got started and stuff. And I always, from an instructional design perspective, it's like when you make a game for the like 10 or 20 or so people that you play with all the time, and it's written for those 10 to 20 people, and they all have inside knowledge, and then you try to put it out into the world, no one's speaking your language.
Oh god, yeah, those books are a mess. The very first D&D booklet assumed you knew so much. It's like, oh, look at these other 2 games for how to do this part of this game. Like,
what 2 games?
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, what?
Right.
Well, and then just like mechanics and stuff too.
Yeah.
It's like I think the only I think I played, I don't even know. I'm AD&D, like we did a little module or something, and I remember we spent 25 minutes just trying to lift a gate.
Oh god,
It's
jeez.
like, no. We had a fun time because we were playing it like very meta, right?
Sure, yeah,
like,
yeah.
This is supposed to, we're playing this to play that experience of what it would have been like back then. And had a fun time. But so going back to WebDM and stuff,
Yeah.
do you guys, like, you talked about like you give advice on GMing and stuff, but is it more interpersonal, like people having, like, what kind of other advice do you give other than outside maybe like here's how to make a good random table?
Sure, yeah. We get, I mean, like the kind of questions that we get asked directly by either our patrons or people through various social media, they run the gamut. It's everything from, what do you guys think about me introducing 10th level spells into my game, to I have 2 players who one of them loves this one NPC and another one hates this one NPC, and they are like, as people, coming to blows over this, you know. And like, so there's a lot of times where we start our advice with, we're not therapists and we're not, you know, like this is our personal experience only. That's all we can do, you know, because so many times the advice that we give is like, there's something going on outside the game that seems to be affecting this. Like, I have seen, you know, what the questioner is describing, I have seen something like it myself, either as a DM or a player. We've played with some really bad players before, and some DMs, you know, and so have this kind of well of like, oh yeah, I remember that happened to me. That was why I walked away from that table. Let me share this experience with you, you know. But so many times we it boils down to, the game is between living people who have relationships with each other and a life outside of the game. Like, that is the plane of play, is between the people, and then you're using your imaginations to propel yourself into this fantasy world. But like, the thing that matters most is how the people at the table relate to each other, communicate, talk, and navigate what will be inevitable friction. The presence of friction is okay. People have differing styles, preferences, what they can deal with that day. Like, conflict and friction isn't necessarily a problem, but navigating it and handling it well can be, especially if you're young and you're not as emotionally mature as you'd like to be, or your friends aren't, or you can't always control who you play with because maybe you play it like an open table or organized play or something, like, you know, those sorts of things, you know.
Yeah, I think it goes kind of back to what Pruitt was saying earlier about how to be a GM, you have to be a pretty empathetic and person when you sit down at the table. I think players should be that way too, right?
Certainly,
the whole table. It should all go the same way.
That's how you, like if you have that's how you have engaged players. If you actually have empathy towards your fellow players, then by definition you should be engaged with them, because you should care, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That touches on, to me,
It's amazing.
That touches on, to me, a part of the advice sort of job. I don't know what you call it. You know, like the giving of advice is like, well, we give players advice too, And usually it's like DM advice. How do I do this? How do I do this? How to avoid being a bad DM, or how to handle problem players. But like, there's plenty of advice out there for players that are things like, look at every one of your fellow players and find something about their character you love that you can relate to, and you can like confirm and validate their imagination as well. Like, lead by example in that respect, because like an engaged player, someone with goals and motivations and is like here to play, man, I don't care what their experience level is. I will take an engaged player with enthusiasm over a veteran any day of the week. Yeah.
Well, I actually have a question for you if you would like to give me some advice.
Oh, sure. Hey, yeah.
Let's just show your guys' skills and knowledge base right now. So here's my deal. I'm currently burning out on my own campaign. Like, I enjoy the system. I'm running Ryutama. I'm actually doing it for a podcast, Shapeshift. I love the game. I love my players, but I'm having a hard time just like sitting down with it. And maybe this is like the personal stuff. Maybe maybe there's more to it. Maybe it's like the outside stuff. I'm not sure. But what would your advice be to me, like to reignite my passion for this campaign?
Well, I will say you could check out our WebDM episode on DM burnout and how.
Perfect. Is that on YouTube?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. But I will say this: one thing that I do to stave off burnout, because it is very real, and it's one of those things that the second you start to think like, man, I can see how I could probably get burned out on this, you've already started the process in your own head. If you can see the possibility for it, then it's probably brewing, because it's happened to me multiple times. But what I have found, that when I'm in the middle of like a campaign that I'm starting to get burned out on, I go back to my appendix in. I go back to what inspired me to come up with the campaign. Because usually I try to pick at least 3 different properties, whether they be a book, a comic book, a movie, a TV show, a simple character, or whatever. And I try to have 3 things that I'm drawing from, putting in my little mental blender to make whatever campaign, right? And so what I will usually do is go back to that source material. I'll watch that movie again and remind myself, like, what inspired me from this movie to do that thing in my campaign? What part of that book was it that I was like, oh, I'm putting that in there? And go back and just read it. Like, remember why you started doing this, because, I mean, life, having things in there like, oh yeah, I did want to have that in the campaign, and then they went this way, so it didn't happen. And maybe that started to lead to a little like internal like letdown. Like, this is something that early on I would experience, where I'm like, I had these cool encounters planned, and then they went right instead of left, and they just have to leave them, and I can't come back to them. And so I mean, I will say that I like to go back to what inspired me about that specific thing, and just kind of take a bath in it again, and just like remind myself, hey, this is I do love these things. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love this question, because we don't normally get to ask a clarifying question back whenever we get it. So
yeah.
when you said you had a hard time sitting down with it, what did you mean?
So I have a process when I do my prep, and it's usually just writing out. I feel like, for me personally, I get better sessions when I at least build some sort of framework of possibilities.
Sure, yeah.
And so usually I sit down, and in my little binder, I start to plan out the branches, kind of like I kind of do like a fork. Mm-hmm. And I just haven't really been able to bring myself to do that. Like, I have the time for it. I could literally do it an hour before bed or like whenever, but I just haven't been
just not into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Pruitt's advice is pretty solid on that. Like, I find that going back to the inspirational sources is great. Like, and I will always talk about D&D because I absolutely love it, but this applies, I think, to a lot of games where it's like, it's the fiction that inspires us to play in the first place. It's the fiction that inspired the creation of this hobby. It was people who were playing with little toy soldiers on a battlefield, like, I want to be that person. Like that one person, like I read in those stories. And so, like, I do think rejuvenating, recharging your creative energies through like inspirational material is a good thing. And then maybe revisiting your prep once you're like excited for it, to go like, is this a place that I'm putting too much time into and it's not paying off. And I'd also let your players know, just so that they know, and they might have a suggestion that we can't think of because we don't know you that we're not there at the game, we don't know you that well. Like, they might have a better sense of what could help, or they might be able to like help you with something else that frees up more time for your creative energy.
I would say, one, thank you for giving me the advice, because for some reason, I didn't think about, I've been listening to a lot of true crime podcasts, and my setting is not a murder mystery or true crime.
Cross-pollinating,
Yeah.
So maybe I should go back to my Studio Ghibli, like, happy pastoral stuff.
Yep.
And then two, like, in the pandemic has made it really, really hard. Like, my campaign was in person, and I would get that energy from it. And then everybody's been isolated because of and online, and so we haven't done it. So I'll reach out to them. So thank you.
Yeah, our pleasure.
So not only
get
do
some
you
Nazca in there.
Yeah, I got the manga too.
Yeah.
Sometimes, winning a game isn't about dealing the most damage, or drawing the most cards, or making any measurable contribution towards victory. But hey, just because you don't have the stats doesn't mean you're not a f***ing gamer god, alright? Enter The Intangibles, a podcast on the Geekspective Network, where me, Kenny, and my brother Matt break down all the things that are hard to quantify in games. All kinds of games. We're talking classics like Sonic's the Hedgehogs, and chess, and 3D Pinball Space Cadet. Great game, by the way. We're talking new releases like
insert latest trending games on Twitch here.
Single player, co-op, competitive, card games, board games, role-playing games, play-by-mail games, the Wakes. We do deep dives into our favorite games, digging into the intangibles that make them great and the intangibles that will make you a better player, and hey, maybe even a better person. Check out the intangibles on whatever the heck platform you're listening to right now.
You've been doing advice, but you have something coming out right now, which I think as of this air date, your Kickstarter will be launched.
Yeah, we'll be right in the middle of it. Just past the halfway mark.
For Weird Wastelands, which I've been looking through some of the media kit stuff. Looks pretty cool. In fact, I made a note that said dice, but we'll talk about that later.
Yes.
But I will. Let's talk about Weird Wastelands.
Yeah.
Who would like to take the reins to go?
Okay. So I don't mind taking the reins on this one. So Weird Wastelands is a book that we're writing. It's what I would call an exploration toolkit for your Dungeons and Dragons games set in a post-apocalyptic fantasy wasteland. The closest analogies that I could probably give the audience are things like Dark Sun or the Mournland from Eberron, places where the use of magic has caused both societal and environmental collapse. And I find it's a good backdrop for a kind of D&D gameplay that is conceptually sort of out there and weird and gonzo, where you're dealing with just the most ridiculous of high magic sort of concepts that will bring in, and yet this sort of savage, day-to-day survival is a struggle gameplay of the post-apocalypse. That those two flavors go well together, I find. Conceptually, this grew out of my own sort of just love of science fantasy and post-apocalypse and a gonzo D&D, and it's somewhere between He-Man, Masters of the Universe, She-Ra, and Mad Max Fury Road and Adventure Time is the Weird Wastelands. And so it's the blending of those genres that I really like. Science fantasy is a big thing that Pruitt and I have a shared appreciation for. The
original.
Right, yeah, no clear boundaries between, is that technology, is it magic? It could be a circlet of blasting, or it could be a cyber eye that you put in your eyeball and can shoot lasers out of. I like that, the broad horizons there, and wedding that kind of, what you call it? I just call it gonzo D&D just because it's, I like a very say yes approach to concepts, and so it's a setting and style that accommodates a lot of variety. with the gritty survival of like, if I don't find enough of the right food to eat, this might be my character's last moment. I personally find really enjoyable. I've run several 5th edition campaigns in it with adjusting the kind of survivability dial up and down. People seem to have fun with it. We did a live play, gosh, it ran for about a year or so on our second YouTube channel, WebDM Plays, where our live plays are archived. And that was called Land Between Two Rivers. And that is a specific setting for me. Weird Wastelands, you could run a Land Between Two Rivers game with it. You could run a Dark Sun game with it. You could run all kinds of different kinds of games with it. But for me, like, Land Between Two Rivers was my expression of this concept of a weird wasteland, of like a place warped and changed by too much magic.
Our kind of elevator pitch that we've been throwing around as a joke is, what if Skyrim and Fallout had a baby?
Yeah.
And that baby was raised by D&D. And so...
Sure, yeah.
That's somewhere in there.
Somewhere in
is
there.
what we're hoping for.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
I am excited when you mentioned Adventure Time, because for me personally, I really love environment as storytelling. Like, people find things in places, and there's obviously something that happened, but we don't know. I think that gives me the goosebumps. Is that the kind of the idea that you're going with Weird Wastelands? Okay, cool. That's
the idea.
Awesome.
Yeah. My favorite kind of D&D game is the exploration game, where like it's best expressed in the dungeon crawl, where it's like, okay, the DM has a map, the map has a key, this is where things are. If you want to find the secret door, you got to be in the right place, and I like an old school style of it, where sometimes we don't even roll dice. If like I look in the right place and I push the right brick or do whatever, then that opens the door, then that opens the secret door. And I like that discovery aspect of like, this, in some ways, like, this place is real. Like it is real to me, at least. And so I wanted to bring that to the game, as well as like address some of those things in 5e that often get brought up of like, oh, well, these spells make wilderness survival trivial, or like this class feature makes it trivial, and go, players choose those for a reason. We don't want to invalidate those choices. So what can we do as DMs to account for the fact that these spells and class features exist, and we still want a game of wilderness survival?
That's exciting. Because I do, like, my personal jam, and why I'm running Ryutama is I like exploration. Like, we're traveling together, we're making stories together, we're finding things along the way, there's nature elements to stuff.
Yep.
I think that's really cool, and maybe that's part of my burnout, and maybe I should use Weird Wastelands, because I generate everything myself.
oh gosh, yeah. Oh no.
I make my own maps, I make my own account, I make my own everything.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Definitely got to refill those batteries.
That'll do it.
Yeah. So it sounds like Weird Wastelands that's why I told you guys I was excited prior to recording. I'm like, okay, reading through the material I got beforehand, I'm like, okay, cool. So it's not an adventure module. This is literally just a toolkit. For making your own thing.
It is.
Well, I was just gonna say, if you remember those 3-5 books, the environmental books like Frostburn or Stormrack, any of those, like, it is more in the vein of that, where it's not a specific setting, it's an implied setting, right? It's if you have something like this in it could be you just have a desert in your world that was like a magical nuclear bomb went off. Well, guess what? You can use Weird Wastelands to populate encounters and monsters and whatever in there. But yeah, it is not a specific adventure book or setting book, although there will be plenty of adventure to be had.
Yeah, I would say it's pregnant with adventure. Like, to me, I don't believe in like a random encounter table that's like 2d4 wolves and 3d6 kobolds. Like, I want something more. I want, what are those wolves doing? Why do they care? Why do the players care? And so, like, everything that we're crafting for it, approaching it from that perspective of like, we need to sell this to the players. Like, there's nothing that's taken for granted. Like, the players could just as easily go, this is boring, I don't care, which is very often a criticism of exploration and journey type games, of like, the things that happen on the way don't mean anything, or they're without context. Let's just skip to the end where the actual adventure is. And I'm like, wait a minute, the journey is the adventure, right? That's to me the heart of fantasy is a journey, is a travel somewhere, contending with the wilderness. I really want to play Ryutama because of that, And like, what we want with Weird Wastelands is a sort of a 1-2 punch for the DMs, where we're going to give them structure for how to run these kinds of games, like sort of like a checklist to follow, but not so rigid or defined that they can't modify it to their tastes. And then a way to generate context for encounters and hazards and challenges and the like, whether those encounters are combat or social or whatever. Like, meaning and context for the players is important, because otherwise they're going to check out. They're not going to care. And like, you're going to run a dud game. But like, if the DM is the only one coming up with that stuff, they will burn out. Like, you're human, like, and like, the secret to DMing is to steal liberally from others. And that's what a good game supplement does, is it gives you a bunch of things to steal.
That's great. Cause like, yeah, I'm over here putting my head down, like, I'm doing all of my creative work.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, you're carrying a real load over there.
I will free myself from this load. So you talked about the you want something more than just 2d4 wolves, some kobolds. What about Weird Wastelands? Like, what makes it weird? Like, can you give me some examples of things you got going on in this book?
Yeah, certainly. So one of the ideas that we're taking seriously with Weird Wastelands is that magic persists. And just because it's magic doesn't mean that it's like separate from the reality of the game world. An example would be the drinking of a potion or the eating of magic food. A lot of times in baseline 5e, you do it, the benefit lasts for a set period of time, and then it's gone. Nothing else. Like, maybe your DM has you roll on a potion mixing table if they're feeling tricksy or something. But we're saying, like, that leaves a lot of like adventurous shenanigans on the table. Like, there's a lot you can do with that. And so the whole book is kind of centered around this conceit of like, magic has a reality in the world, and like, once a spell's effect is over, that doesn't mean that there's not some residue or impact on the world. And if you get enough magic occurring in one place, whether it's magic bound into items and constructs and big war titans and bio magical horrors or whatever, like, you get enough of it, you get enough people casting spells, it changes things. Think of it like pollution, right? Or radiation or something. And that's definitely inspired by Dark Sun with that, as well as like Eberron. So some of the things that we've got, like our promo features Toxic Alchemical Sump, which is a crashed airship that is both the cause of the desert around it and sort of a consequence of it. The airship crashed a long time ago. We're very vague with a lot of the details and things like this so that it's easier to fit into your game world. But a long time ago it crashed, and sort of the alchemical reservoir or whatever is leaked up and created these gross, like, sludgy pools of foul magic. And the idea is that your party can go there to explore all different kinds of things. They can harvest some of the sludge and process it for magical components or things. They can take drinks of it just to see what weird stuff might happen. And like, not all of it's bad. Like, you could commune with the gods, but you're going to be like kind of paralyzed and babbling while you do it, And then it's a variety of like suggested encounters that can turn that location into like a bloodbath near TPK if you wanted, or a fun opportunity to meet some locals, share some information, and learn something. And that by giving you a preset location with suggested encounters and sort of detailing out and doing the hard work of like, okay, this is the DC, this is how it works, trying to present it in a way that isn't too overwhelming for the DM, you give them like a toy box filled with fun things that they can then tailor. And the weirdness comes from the little bits of detail of like, you could dredge one of the pools and pull out your player, or like a clone of one of the characters that's like ready for resurrection, or an undead warhorse, sorry, not a warhorse, but an Allosaurus that you could use as a warhorse. That's like, you could travel all day with this thing. It doesn't need to eat. Like, in the context of an environment where journeys and wilderness survival are important, having that kind of mount that you don't need to worry about what it eats and how far it can go or whether it's going to get sunstroke is an asset. And
It's Harry Dresden approved.
yeah, that kind of thing.
Spoiler alert. I don't know how far, if anybody's in that.
Yeah. So how about you, Pruitt? What's something in this that you're like, ooh, this is...
Well, well, I've been focusing most of my efforts on the class that we're doing for it, the Scion, which is, to us, we're always going to do a Scion. It's a nod to Dark Sun amongst other Wasteland-based, so to speak, or I'm thinking of like Dune and the Bene Gesserits. There's a lot of inspiration of just like there's Wastelands and some crazy psychic powers going on, and so that's where I've been focusing most of my efforts is getting that ready. And so there's going to be promo material for that, depending on when this comes out.
Very soon.
Very soon?
Like in 2 days.
Oh,
from
the
air date to.
I'm sure we've advertised that. But anyway, that's where I've been focusing. So I'm interested to see how people like it. I don't know. It's one of those things that I've always wanted to do, and all the offerings thus far have just been kind of spaghetti against the wall, like all of it. And like the UA Mystic was a bit overwhelming, even though I had a lot of fun with the players that I made using it. But I could see like, wow, this is kind of OP. Like it can just do everything if you want. So I kind of paired that way back, and so it did something a little bit different because we wanted to distinguish psionics and magic. But we're also offering some advice in there on, if you don't want to, it's very easy to just, it's a different expression of magic. And so it's a way of thinking that we've always tried to portray with all of our advice, which is, there are many roads to nirvana. Like anyone who says there's only one path, they're just trying to sell you a map. Like that's the thing. And so, we're saying, psionics are different than magic. They're two different things, but here's a couple rules of how, detect magic or things like that, dispel, counterspell. But but you'll be able to see that when it comes out.
Yes.
Don't want to give away too much behind the curtain.
Yeah. I was like, well, my question for you guys, is this your first foray into books, or did I miss something along the years? Is this your first time?
We've done some freelance work for 5e the last few years. We're writing monsters for Ghostfire Gaming's Grim Hollow setting right currently, which I'm not sure when those will be out, but when they are, some of those will be our monsters. And then we've also worked with 2C Gaming, another third-party publisher, on 3 or 4 projects now. For me, a lot of it's they're on their epic level line. So I've worked a lot of sort of DM tools and monsters for their epic level handbooks. But they have a bestiary called the TPK Bestiary 2 that all of us at WebDM contributed multiple monsters for.
Yeah.
If I do say so myself, are quite interesting, unique, and terrifying.
The reason I was asking is because for people who are a fan of your guys' work, is there something, like, is there a trademark thing that is WebDM's, something that, I don't know, that they would find here as well?
Ooh, that's a good question. There will certainly be things from my home campaign and also from Pruitt's that are in there that we reference on our shows, whether podcast or videos. And, we know that there are enough of our, our audience out there that also like the campaign worlds we've come up with. Sometimes as someone who creates and shares that creation, I'm reminded that how others take your creation and make it their own and share it, especially in a medium like role-playing games, where it's intensely personal. It's about these few people around your physical or digital table. They're going to make it their own, and it's going to be like unique to them and really mean something to them, that like once something's out in the world, once I've opened my mouth, like I can't really control what someone else does with that. And so I'm always reminded of like what I might see as valuable or not valuable, someone else has a different opinion on. So we want to make sure that we give enough of what people find inspiring that they feel it's worth it.
So we know about the Scion class and that this is a toolkit and you've got some like setting stuff that is in there, but what all is encompassed in the Weird Wastelands toolkit?
So for Dungeon Masters, we're going to have a simple procedure for how to handle a journey, basically with both a day-by-day approach and a kind of zooming in on a day, but not quite like a minute-by-minute, so sort of like dividing the day up into about 4-hour chunks. And that this will provide GMs with a structure to base wilderness survival and travel around if they so choose. And embedded within that procedure will be a way to generate various hazards and events, encounters, things like that, referencing other parts of the book, of course. And that next to that will also be tools for like how to create your own wasteland, right? How to take a blank piece of paper or a blank map and follow these steps to create your own, and like placing things on it and figuring out like both where the preset locations that we'll have fit in it, and then where the tools for sort of making more generic locations are going to fit in it. And that the goal is to have a variety of sort of follow these steps cookbook style procedures to like make your own map, know how to travel across that map. Once they've decided they're going to explore a set location, what happens then? What are some like moments that we can zoom in on, either to like have a challenge that highlights the character's strengths or gives them a moment to do something. So like an example of this would be with the way the Ranger's currently written, I'm never going to get to zoom in on a moment where they have to like figure out where they are. They're just never lost. And so we're bypassing a moment of play with that, and by including a variety of tools for both the players and giving the GM the ability to like generate moments, generate encounters, and provide structure and context for their games, what we hope to have is that the player or the Ranger can like have a moment to shine where they go, no, I think we're in some pretty dangerous territory here. Give me a minute to scout ahead. Give me a minute to get used to the place. I know a way through this. Without me, you'd be screwed. And like, those are the kinds of gameplay moments that we're wanting to produce and to set up.
But other than that, in the book, we do have, like we already mentioned, the locations. We're going to have monsters in there. We're going to include some spells for the Wasteland, as well as, like Jim mentioned earlier, where you have spells like Goodberry or Create Food and Water that you would think, well, in a Wasteland, that's exactly the spell you'd want. But it's magic food. So, what does that mean? Like, we're always told never accept food from fairies because it's magical.
Because it's magic food,
Yet
right?
we have these spells that's like, well, let's eat this so we can survive. So, like, that's like when you think through the process of that, you're like, wait a minute, that should have an effect, shouldn't it? And so have at least some thoughts on that and how you could change it to better suit the Wasteland. But also a subclass for each of the the base classes. As well as some feats to also support that. Am I forgetting anything else, Jim?
I mean, it's a 5th edition supplement. We're taking a 5th edition approach of like, there's something for everyone. Where we want everybody who can, who enjoys 5th edition or not, like even if they're not a 5th edition player, that there's something inspirational or useful or interesting for them here. And even if you're not into like gonzo post-apocalyptic fantasy, that you can at least reskin or take inspiration from, or like, oh, that effect looks cool, I'm going to give that to my evil wizard or something like that.
I just want to say, one, I love, like I said, environmental storytelling, and this is like really my jam. But two, I really love the concept of like magical environmental impact.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
You use it, but at what cost?
Yeah.
And I think that's fantastic. And to apply it, to this post-apocalyptic kind of setting is awesome. So then my question for you is, do you guys have plans on maybe doing the same kind of idea with a toolkit in other kind of genres in the future? And can you talk about it, or do you want to talk about that?
Oh yeah.
I mean, well, we can talk about it some. I will just point out that I lost the word. What is that word?
The full title.
The full title is Worlds of WebDM, plural. So I think we're at least tipping our hand a bit with that this being the first book. Certainly, there are some other settings that WebDM has played games in extensively, and might want to present in some form of similar setting book. I don't know. But, we'll just have to see...
Yeah, see how this goes, right?
Yeah, certainly.
We'll have to see what's if it's written in the stars or not. I don't know.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much for coming on. If people want to find you individually, where can they do so? And then, of course, WebDM stuff.
Certainly, yeah. You can find me intermittently on Twitter at the Real Jim Davis. I post there occasionally, but it's also it's Twitter, so sometimes I take big long breaks. But I try to respond to DMs or the like, people trying to get in touch with us. Other than that, I play in a Pendragon game on Eric Vulgaris's Twitch channel on Monday nights. We're working on a year and a half now of the Great Pendragon campaign. For those of you not familiar, this is one where you start gaming in the era of King Arthur's dad, Uther, and then you play like your character and your character's children and grandchildren and whatever across 80 years of mythical British history. And we're about 30 years into that so far. I'm playing my first character's kid currently, and it's very fun, very cool. So check that out. It's Mondays at 8 Eastern.
And I'm. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at jpruinc. I'm on there again, like Jim, pretty intermittently. I'm not big on Twitter as much as I used to be. You gotta breathe sometimes, but also the YouTube channel WebDM, and also all of our archived games from our Twitch and all of our live plays and actual plays are on WebDM Plays, which is a secondary YouTube channel, and also check us out on Patreon if you want to support, and where we do another weekly podcast on there that usually runs about an hour and a half. So it's not that bad of a deal for if you want extra WebDM content.
Yeah, if you just like listening to us just ramble
Babble
and go off tangents and well, forget things and perfect. It's perfect.
You know what? I personally love when it's two friends and a group of friends sharing friend time together. That's the kind of listening I like. And then, of course, dear listeners, I will put a Kickstarter link for Weird Wastelands in the show description so you can find it and check it out if it's your jam. And so thank you again so much for sharing everything with me.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much
Thanks
for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
I don't know why I waved goodbye. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. You can find me on Twitter at RocketOrca, Kenny as at Wolfmere, and John is at CrosswaysGM. Tabletop Babble is part of the Geekspective Network. Go to geekspective.com to check out all our other shows or follow us on Twitter at Geekspective. Our theme music was provided by the Battle Bards.